We'll be in Matthew chapter 10 this morning. Matthew chapter 10. We've been working our way through Matthew, and we've been just following along the text, reading what the text says, thinking about it, and making application. It's amazing how helpful that is to me as I'm studying, and I hope that it's helpful to you. We saw last time it kind of ended with a little bit of a cliffhanger. You remember Jesus has done a lot of miracles. There's like 3 sets of miracles that Matthew reveals to us in his gospel. The first one, he heals all these diseases. The second one, he shows this power over nature, over demons, and over sins, that he can forgive sins. And then in the last set, we really see brought out this picture of God desires mercy, not sacrifice. And he showed that to us when the disciples of John came asking, "Why don't you sacrifice like us? Why don't you fast like us?" He said, "Why should we fast? Why should we sacrifice right now? And the bridegroom's here. It doesn't make sense to fast." And then he shows a ton of miracles and showing his mercy toward all these people. God desires mercy and not sacrifice. Yet the Pharisees saw all this mercy, and they had the wrong idea, the wrong attitude toward Jesus' work. And if you remember last time, we looked at verses 36 through 38 just kind of barely. And this time it really sets the stage for what we're going to be studying this morning. In Matthew 9:36, it says, "When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" Kind of left us with this cliffhanger, right? Jesus has pointed out that there seem to be many sheep out there who are looking, who are desiring. And those sheep are like Matthew. They're tax collectors. They're sinners. They're rejected by the Pharisees. And they have no shepherd to guide them. They are instead harassed and helpless out there. And they want to turn. They want to be obedient to God. But they need someone to show them the way. And then he shifts his image to the harvest. And he says, as he looks out at all these sinners who just flooded to him and wanting to know more about the kingdom, and he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And he tells his disciples, pray earnestly for laborers to go out and to gather his harvest. And that just kind of left us wondering what's going to happen with all of these sinners that are coming to Jesus. And as Jesus sees this huge harvest, there's tons of sinners everywhere who have not understood what these Pharisees have been teaching. And they just don't understand the kingdom of heaven at all. And they feel like they're not good enough, and they feel like they can't possibly be able to take in the blessing. And they're just lost, and they're harassed, and they're helpless. They need laborers. They need people to go and tell them the good news of the gospel. What's going to happen? Well, chapter 10 tells us what is going to happen. As we read into this section, notice the response to their prayers. The disciples are commanded, pray earnestly. Let the Lord deliver us laborers for the harvest. In verse 1 of chapter 10, "And he called to him his 12 disciples, and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these: first Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him." After seeing the harvest is plentiful, realizing there needs to be more laborers, Jesus gathers his 12 and he gives them authority and power to heal and to cast out unclean spirits. And now these 12 men are going to be the laborers that have been prayed for. He's going to be sending them out to do the work of shepherding, of bringing in those who are lost sheep. Isn't that interesting that They prayed for it, and now he turns to 12 of them and says, all right, you're the guys that they've been praying for. And he gives them authority and all this power and all this ability to go out and do that. It's also interesting to note that this is the whole description of these 12 disciples in Matthew's gospel. We have the first four, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. They were mentioned back in Matthew chapter 4 as being fishermen who left their nets and their boats and their families and followed after Jesus. And Matthew describes himself as a tax collector in the last chapter, chapter 9. But nobody else in here do we know anything about. So if you're looking at this for the first time, and you don't know that Jesus has chosen 12 disciples, and these guys go on to do this and that and this and that, and they're these big members in the church, and you're just reading this, you're like, who are these guys that he gave all this authority to, all this power to? Like, what qualified them? How are they worthy of going out and doing this wonderful work that Jesus has been doing himself? What makes them fit that mold? What makes them so good? And we might just say, we have no idea what makes them so good. And as we look at these guys, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, we kind of know them, right? There's stories that are told about them. Then the second group, the second four, Philip, we know from the book of Acts, right? That he went to Samaria. Bartholomew is Nathaniel. We know about Nathaniel that there is no deception in him from John's gospel, but that's about all we know about Nathaniel. Thomas was doubting Thomas, who also said, let's go to Jerusalem and die there. You know, he's got a good side, but he's also doubting Jesus' resurrection. And then Matthew, the tax collector, we know him. But then the last group of four, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, we don't know anything really about them. And then Judas Iscariot, the only thing we know about him is not good. Yet he was called to be part of the 12 who would go out and was given authority and power over all these demons and over all these sicknesses to bring in the lost sheep of Israel. These are nobodies, essentially. None of these guys are prominent in society. None of these guys stand out because of all their accomplishments. They don't fit the bill of top disciple or anything like that. But yet Jesus has called and decided that these are the 12 guys he wants to go into the harvest and bring it in. Isn't that interesting? Well, the next 4 sections of chapter 10 are all about Jesus preparing these 12 men for a limited amount of work that he's going to let them do. This is a chapter about preparing disciples for the work of going out and evangelizing and bringing in the lost sheep that are out there. So we see 4 sections. We see Jesus instructing them on the things that they are to do when they go out. He gives them a section about expectations, things they need to expect as they go out into the world. He talks to them to calm their fears. And then the final section, he tries to correct their misconceptions. Okay? So that's kind of the big picture of this chapter as we go through it. The first section is instruction. Let's read this. Chapter 10, verses 5 through 15. It says, "These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or staff, for the laborer deserves his food. In whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. So listen to some of these instructions that Jesus gives to his disciples. First of all, he tells them to go out and to proclaim the gospel, proclaim the news about the kingdom of heaven, that it is at hand for everybody to know and everybody to hear. This is the same thing John did and the same thing that Jesus has done. Now the disciples are going to go out and do. And he also says, use that power and that authority to heal the sick, raise the dead, just like Jesus did, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. Jesus has given them all the power and all the authority that he himself had, and that they are now supposed to go to the lost sheep of Israel, not to the Gentiles, not to anybody else. Notice how he kind of limits who they can go to, not just go out everywhere, but only going as Jesus has gone to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and to heal and to do all these wonderful things to show them their message is true. The kingdom of heaven is really at hand. And he even tells them additional instruction here saying, you received without pay, give without pay. So as they do this, you imagine, you've got power, you've got authority. I mean, who here can imagine going out and healing and reviving those who are dead and casting out demons and straightening up those who might have some major issues in their lives, and then telling them the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But having all that power, how valuable would that be to those around us? How much money could you make with that kind of power? Jesus says, don't take any money for that. You're not using these gifts, these abilities to get money. You received without paying. Now you turn around and you give without paying. And he even tells his disciples, don't carry with you your supplies. Leave your supplies at home and go out without a bag or without another tunic or without a staff, because the laborer is worthy of his food. Imagine going out like that, having nothing with you. How many of us, when we go on vacations, we've got suitcases and suitcases? I mean, we got a van that has all this space in the back, and we're going on a 3-day trip. And I'm like, how do we fill this up? Like, I could survive on a backpack. And we've got all of this stuff with us. And here, they're not even bringing a backpack. They're being forced to fully rely on God to provide for them. And then he tells them, seek out someone in the town you enter who is worthy, and go into their house and stay with them until you depart. Now, you imagine going into a town and asking around, who's the best guy here? Who's worthy? Who's a good guy in this town? And then they tell you, and you go to his house, and it's a slum, and then you preach and you teach, and then there's a lot of people who seem interested, and then there's this rich guy who says, hey, why are you staying there? Come on and stay with me. No, Jesus said, stay where you are with the man who is worthy. And if the man who is supposed to be worthy is not worthy, then you don't stay there. But if he's worthy, you stay there, you give him peace. And this is something they would commonly do in the first century. They would say, peace be to you. And that was a way of giving peace, asking God to bless the person with peace. But if the person is not worthy, and if the people do not listen, he says, you can take your peace back. It's interesting that Jesus allows for that, right? It's not once you give it, don't be an Indian giver. You know, you gave it, you just let them have it. No, you take your peace back. And if they reject you and do not listen to your words, he gives them the permission to shake the dust off their feet when they leave, essentially saying, I don't want anything to do with you because you have a curse coming upon you. You have judgment coming upon you. He says it's going to be worse than Sodom and Gomorrah for that city or that town or that home. So as Jesus is giving all of these instructions, we see Jesus is trying to help them understand their mission and help them have the right focus. And as we look at this, we can kind of see what's going to happen. They're supposed to go out and receive and bring in the lost sheep of Israel. This is the way that they're going to do it. But this is really all a growing experience for the disciples. He restricts them. He doesn't let them go to the Gentiles, and he doesn't give them free rein to make all kinds of decisions. He really lays down all the things they're supposed to do in this case because he recognizes how spiritually immature they are and what they need. But he at the same time knows there's this huge harvest and we need laborers, and so he's going to send them out anyway, just with these restrictions. He starts them out, notice, with what they're familiar with. This whole time, Jesus has been doing all of these same things. Jesus has been healing and doing all these miracles and proclaiming the kingdom of God to the people of Israel. And now he just tells his disciples, what you just saw me do, just do that. That's it. That's all I'm asking for you to do. Then in the next section, he starts to set their expectations. Look at verse 16. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciples to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If they had called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? Notice here, Jesus sets their expectation. He helps them understand what's about to take place. The very first words, behold. Listen here. This needs to be heard, okay? You need to understand what you're getting yourself into. And he doesn't hold anything back. I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Jesus is calling his shepherds sheep in the midst of wolves, right? It's kind of like he still sees them as his sheep whom he's helping along, but he needs laborers, so he's sending them out with faith and trust that God's going to watch over them. But he tells them, you need to be very aware of this. You will be surrounded by the wolves. They're all around you. And they're seeking to devour you. So if you thought this was going to be a glamorous job, that, oh, wow, look, I've got all these powers and all these abilities, man, this is going to be great. You need to wake up here. This is not as easy as you might once think. We might look at that and say, but wait, if I was a disciple, I'd say, what? Why would I be a sheep in the midst of wolves? I am doing good to people. I'm healing people. I'm telling them good news. Why would anybody ever reject healing and good news? That's the truth. Why would they reject that? Isn't that insane? That's what they've been doing to Jesus. And so Jesus tells them and prepares them for this. You need to remember, you need to understand what's really going on. You are sheep in the midst of wolves. The people around you might seem like your friend, but they're seeking to devour you. And there's a need, he says, to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We talked about serpents in Bible class this morning. Serpents are not given a pretty picture throughout the Bible. Serpents are typically representative of Satan. In the beginning of the Garden of Eden, Satan was the serpent. And so here he tells them, be wise as serpents. Have that cunning, have that wisdom and that insight and the ability to see and understand what's beneficial to you and what will go the right way. Other translations might say shrewd as serpent. Same idea. You want the cunning of the serpent. But notice what he joins to it. Also be innocent as doves. As they go out and they're surrounded by wolves, they need to be thinking the way the wolves are thinking to understand what they might do that would trick you and that might cause you to stumble, or that might cause you to fall into a trap or be devoured. And Jesus is clearly trying to help them understand it's okay to do what's beneficial for you. But whenever you do that, make sure you don't fall into their traps and become a deceiver. The serpent was cunning, but he was also deceptive. And he says, you be wise, but you be pure. And you be honest, and you be truthful in all the things that you do. And he says, you're gonna be mistreated. Just expect it. Listen to all this mistreatment. They're going to deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. Anybody want to be flogged? Does that sound fun to anybody? That's bad. That hurts. Beating. People beating us. That's not good. That's not fun. Now, being taken into court over something. Being accused of evil. Having to go before kings and rulers and tell them our story and what happened. That's not a fun thing. Being imprisoned is not a fun thing. But he says that's what you have to expect. Expect that to happen. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Imagine going through that. And he says, kind of good news. He brings in some comfort. Jesus does this throughout, brings in some comfort. Whenever you go before them, don't be anxious. God's going to give you what you need to say and going to help you speak rightly. He's going to speak through you. You can expect God to be with you in your work and to watch over you. But it's going to be bad. It's going to be really bad. He says, brother will deliver brother over to death. For those of you who have brothers, imagine, a sister, imagine going to them to tell them the good news of the Messiah that you have found that has done all these wonderful works, and then you can prove to them the good work that you've done, that you're able to do because God is working through you. You can prove it's the truth. And then your brother turns you in, and you end up being punished and put to death. How horrible would that sound? Your father doing that to you. Your child doing that to you. That's just horrible. They're signing up for this. He says, you'll be hated by all for my name's sake. They're signing up for this. He tells them at the end, the one who endures to the end will be saved. And when they persecute you in one town, it's okay to flee. He's helping them understand. If your family refuses, and it seems like they're going to betray you, don't feel so much loyalty to your family or so much loyalty to this town that you stick around longer than you're needed and that you end up falling or suffering as a result. It's okay to leave those who won't accept the truth. Jesus is not calling for them to be martyrs here. He's letting them know it's okay to go away to help other people. He says, you'll not go through all the towns before the Son of Man comes. There's plenty of people out there. Keep moving, keep going. And then at the end, a disciple is not above his teacher. This kind of points back to what I said in the instructions. They're doing the same work that Jesus did, and they can expect the same result that Jesus found. That people will hate them, that people will malign them. In the next section, you might get the sense that they're a little afraid. After hearing all of this is going to happen to them. And so Jesus comes in with trying to calm their fears and instead redirect their fears. Listen to this, verse 26 through 33. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who's in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Now, there's some comfort here but then there's not. He's calming their fears a little after they heard the last section about all this judgment, all this evil around them, these wolves seeking to devour them. He tells them in response to that, you don't need to be afraid of them. You don't need to worry about them. He says it 3 times. Do not fear them. Do not fear those who kill the body. Fear not, therefore. He tells them, you don't need to be afraid of them. You can go ahead and speak the truth boldly. You can tell them all the things that I'm telling you, and you can reveal where they're lying, and all those things are going to be revealed, that they're evil and that they're lying and doing horrible things. You can speak boldly. God's going to expose those lies and all of that corruption. And he also tells them this in verse 29, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them fall to the ground apart from the Father? God is able to take care of these little worthless sparrows. Sounds a lot like back in Matthew chapter 6, whenever he talked about anxiety and overcoming that. God cares for you. He says, God knows the number of hairs on your head, and he cares for you. You don't need to be afraid of them. They can't kill you unless God lets them kill you. God is taking care of them over and over and over again as they're going to go out and spread this good news. But at the same time, there's something to make you a little uncomfortable. Instead of being uncomfortable about those who can kill you, those ravenous wolves that are going to attack you and cast you in prison and maybe kill you, he tells them, you instead need to be afraid of the one who can cast your body and your soul into hell. You need to be afraid of God. The fear that you have is not right in men. It should be instead in God. And he tells them, if you'll acknowledge my name before God, then I'm going to acknowledge your name before him. If you acknowledge my name before men, I'm going to acknowledge your name before God. And that's ultimately all that we could ever ask for. And so he gives them this great hope, but then he tells them, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father who is in heaven. The thing that we really should be afraid of is God destroying our soul because we refuse to tell people the truth and because they refuse to acknowledge Jesus' name before men. That's what they should be afraid of. That's what they should be most concerned about. They should really be afraid of being afraid of men. That's what they should be afraid of. I don't want to get in a situation where I am afraid of men doing things to me. I don't want to get into a mindset where I'm afraid of people doing things, evil things to me, if I'm going to be that disciple that goes out and proclaims as Jesus wants them to. And then the last section, verse 34 through the end of the chapter, he says, do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his own cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he's a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and the one who receives a righteous person because he is righteous, a righteous person, will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones a cup of cold water because he's a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. You see how he's now helping to, they're then be questioning all this. How does this work? How does this all make sense? I mean, the Messiah is supposed to come and bring peace. His message is supposed to be a message of peace. It's supposed to help all the people come to a relationship with God where there is peace. And Jesus is telling them, I didn't come to bring peace. Even though his message is to ultimately bring peace with God, there will not be peace between men as a result of this. Instead, there will be strife. There will be man against man, a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his household. Imagine hearing these words, and the misconception going into this is, well, that's great. Me and all of my family now are going to be saved by the Messiah, and instead, what Jesus says is, what you need to expect, those who you pour out your love for will betray you. This is what you need to accept. And he tries to help them understand, you have to love me more than them. You have to love me more than them in order to be my disciple, in order to follow through with this. Because the love that you have for your father and your mother and your brother and your sister and your children, if that love is greater than your love for me, then you will fall. You will not obey me. You will not call out my name. You will deny me for the sake of those you love more than me. He says, this is what it means for you right now to take up your cross and follow me. This is what you go through. But he also says this is the way that the lost sheep find their reward. He ends it on this great positive note. Whoever receives you receives me. You know, all of this negativity and all of this instruction has led you kind of thinking, well, why would I want to go out and do that? Sounds like I'm just asking myself for disappointment. But then there's these statements. Whoever receives you receives me. Whoever receives me receives him who sent me. You are receiving the reward now of a prophet. You're receiving the reward of a righteous person, even though you're not righteous. You're receiving my reward. I'm giving it to you. And there's this wonderful ending to help us understand that it's worth it. The laborers have to be willing to share the truth without fear of losing their life or losing their family because they love God so much and because they love the lost sheep and want them to receive the reward. How does all of this apply to us? Gone through the entire 10th chapter. That's pretty ambitious, but I hope it helps to see it all together. I think it really helps me to see it all together. We've seen Jesus pretty much in this chapter describe his work, right? This is his work. This is what he goes out to do at this time, and this is now what he wants his disciples, these 12 men, to go out and do. And as we look at this from the outside, we're thinking, who in the world would ever agree to live like that? Who would agree to go out and to teach these stubborn, rebellious people? And we have to realize if they didn't believe that this was the truth, they would have never done it. Jesus is asking them to go and to preach the truth to people who would hate them. I'm not signing up for that if it's not the truth. If there's any doubt in my mind that this is really the Messiah, I'm not going through all of that pain and all of that suffering. But they knew this was the truth. This is the Messiah. And they were willing to go through that for God. But in spite of all the negatives, as you look through this, if you pick out the positives, wow, this is an encouraging text. You think about the different things that Jesus says to try to encourage his disciples, you're really blown away by it. Jesus says God's going to provide them with what they need. They don't need to take anything with them. God is with them, providing for them. That they are free to leave the people that reject the message. They don't have to stick around for the persecution. They, like Jesus, can slip away because it's not their time. They can use wisdom and discernment and avoid the ravenous wolves that are trying to attack them. And they're encouraged to do what's most beneficial to them as long as they remain pure and righteous. He promises them that God will be with them and help them as they speak. He promises them that God will give them blessing and reward, that he will acknowledge their name before the God of heaven. He promises them that God knows the number of hairs on their head and that he will not let them fall until it's their time. What encouragement there is throughout all of this. They don't need to be afraid of anybody. But I'd say the biggest encouragement is Jesus just saying, look at me. I'm not asking you to do something I'm not already doing. Just follow me and do what I'm doing. He's not asking them to go above and beyond. Now, we might look at this and we might say, well, I'm not the 12. I'm not one of them. I don't have power over sickness and disease and casting out lepers and raising the dead. And I'm not one of the 12 being sent to these cities of the lost sheep of Israel and taking all this literally. It doesn't really make sense, but it doesn't. But we see here that there's just this image. There's this taste that he gives us of what he wants us to do. As these men are following Jesus' footsteps and doing the work that Jesus came to the earth to do, this is what ultimately we've been called to do. Back in Matthew chapter 5, verse 11, you remember, blessed are those who are persecuted for my name's sake. He says, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And then he says, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. And if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under the basket, but set it out on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. We've been called to this same thing. Now, there's a number of things that we might not apply to ourselves perfectly, but there are a number of ideas in this text that we must apply to ourselves and understand. There are lost sheep everywhere that God wants us to go out and find. And it's going to be uncomfortable. I mean, you hear this. I know many of us hear this and we just think, oh, it doesn't sound very comfortable way of life, going up to talk to this person that doesn't act right or doesn't do things right, and how are they going to respond, and all of this kind of stuff. But ultimately, this is not about comfort. It's about lost souls. Seeking the lost is what Jesus came to do, and it's what his people are all about. There are literally hundreds of thousands of unchurched people in Mobile County. I wonder how many of them have been given a gospel that's distorted. I wonder how many of them don't think that they're smart enough to understand the Bible. I wonder how many of them think that they're too bad of a sinner to deserve God's grace. And they don't understand how God could do that for them. I wonder how many Matthews there are out there. Are we ready to go out there and to reach them? Are we ready for God to make us the answer to our prayers? To become the laborers that are going out into the harvest and gathering those who would accept? You know, if you're like me, you struggle. I don't like evangelism sermons that much because I tend to feel like I'm beating everybody up, because honestly, our generation is not that into evangelism at all. And I myself get beat up by evangelism sermons. I feel like there's always more I could do. So I just start thinking about, why don't I speak up? Why am I not saying things when the opportunity comes up? I'm just too busy for that. Really? I'm too busy for lost souls? Really? I've got too much stuff that I want to do to go out and to find the lost sheep and to give them the most wonderful blessing this world has to offer? Or maybe you think, I'll let the professionals handle that. I don't have a degree in theology. I can't do that. Well, these guys aren't professionals. These guys are nobodies. And Jesus said, go. There's not enough laborers in the vineyard for me to do all the work, Jesus said. And that's certainly true of preachers. There's not enough preachers to do all the work that needs to be done. But the thing I tell myself the most, that is probably one of the most crippling things I think to a lot of us, is if I say something, I'm just going to get rejected. People are just going to look at me weird, going to think negative thoughts about me, and that whole relationship that I was building up is going to be ruined. Obviously, I need to be wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove. I can use wisdom as I speak to people and avoid a lot of that. But ultimately, we're told in this text that that's what's going to happen. Yeah, we use wisdom, we remain innocent, but ultimately we find out we need to expect rejection. There might be a Matthew out there, and we have to find him in spite of the rejection. And instead of fearing men, we need to be fearing God. That's who we need to fear. We need to fear denying Jesus' name before men, failing to do the work that God has given us to do. You want to know why our society is going downhill? It's because they don't know God like we do. And we're not willing to tell them about him. This is not your failure. This is our failure. But this is what we're called to do. So we're having an evangelism class in 2 weeks. And I want you to be here to help us evangelize and reach out to the lost so that we can bring in the lost sheep. And the lost sheep aren't going to look like us. They're going to be sinners and tax collectors and make all kinds of mistakes and make us uncomfortable. But through God's love and compassion and mercy, they'll be transformed like we are, because we are just as bad as they are. If you're here this morning and you are a lost sheep, and you know it, and you want God to provide that cleansing and that relationship, he gave us Jesus for that very purpose. And you can receive that blessing and that grace. You can put on Christ today. You can be forgiven of all your sins and begin to walk anew, a life that is pleasing to God. If there's anybody here that needs to do that, will you please come as we stand and as we sing?